Pastor Mark Buetow, and this is another episode of Bible 101. So the church continues to grow by the preaching of the gospel. Saul, a murderer, had become Paul, the apostle. Cornelius, a Gentile, had heard the gospel. The church was growing in Antioch, which was in Syria. Many of the Hellenists, who were Greek Jewish converts, also heard the gospel and believed. One of the disciples, a man named Barnabas, was sent to check on the church at Antioch, and he also went down to Tarsus and found Saul and brought him back to Antioch. And Saul and Barnabas were there teaching the church. And the scriptures note, in the book of Acts, that it was at Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians, that is, the believers, followers, and hearers of Jesus Christ. But even as the church grew, the forces of evil, the devil, tries to destroy the church. King Herod, who was in Jerusalem, decided he would kill James, the brother of John, the one we hear of often in the Gospels. And he realized that this pleased the Jews immensely. And so he was going to round up other Christians and kill them too. So he had Peter arrested. And there's a great story in the book of Acts about how Peter escapes from his prison. Now this was not the same King Herod that had killed the babies of Bethlehem. That was Herod the Great back about 30 years before when Jesus had been born. There was another Herod who was the son of Herod the Great. He's the one who Jesus saw. He was in Jerusalem and became friends with Pontius Pilate when Jesus was crucified. But this Herod was yet another in the line of Herods. He ruled parts of Galilee and so on. But he was in Jerusalem and he was persecuting the church, and he realized that killing a guy like James made the Jews happy. And of course, wanting to be a popular guy, he got a hold of Peter also. So the night before Peter is going to be brought out, presumably to be killed like James was, he's sleeping between a couple of the guards in the prison, and all of a sudden an angel of the Lord appears to Peter. Get dressed, put on your sandals, and let's go. And the angel begins leading Peter out of the prison, out through the dungeon. The doors swung open by themselves, and once Peter was outside, suddenly he's alone, and he realizes the Lord sent his angel to get me out of here. And so he heads to where the church is gathered. He gets to the house where the church is gathered, where the disciples of Jesus are, and he begins beating on the door in the middle of the night. And in what's sort of one of these funny stories in the Bible, Rhoda, the servant girl, goes to the door, realizes it's Peter, and she's so excited, she runs back to tell the other disciples without actually letting him in. No way, Rhoda, the disciples say. There's no way that's Peter. Maybe you saw his angel, or maybe you're having a dream or something, but that's not possible that that's Peter out there standing at the door. But of course, it was actually Simon Peter, and when the disciples had heard his story, he departed and got out of there to hide from King Herod. And of course, the next day, they could not find Peter, and so the soldiers who had let him escape, of course, it wasn't their fault, but they had been there when he escaped, Herod had them put to death. Luke tells us that later on, Herod was having some people come and dealing with some stuff. And when Herod spoke, they said, "This is not a man, this is a god." And so everyone was treating Herod like he was popular and he was a god. And of course, he did not give glory to the true God. So, Luke records in the book of Acts, Herod was eaten by worms and he died. So one of the things we see here is what Jesus told his disciples is in fact the case. That just as they persecuted him, just as they killed him, so his disciples also would suffer. Persecution, mockery, suffering, and even death, as James did. Yet at the same time, the Lord continues to defend and to grow his church. And we see that even as these men pass away, apostles like James, and new apostles come like Paul, Barnabas, even as the Lord's church is attacked, it continues to grow because the Holy Spirit continues to call, gather, enlighten, and sanctify in the holy Christian church. No matter how hard he tries, the devil cannot destroy the church. The enemies of Christ cannot destroy the church. And while it is indeed true that Jesus' disciples, and even you and I, will suffer for the name of Christ, nothing can wipe out his church. And so we see that this battle continues to rage. The devil and the enemies of the cross of Christ try to destroy Jesus' church, and yet the Lord continues to grow and build and bring into his church sinners who are being saved. I'm Pastor Mark Buetow. This has been another episode of Bible 101.